Welcome back. You are listening to the home of forbidden romances. Prepare yourself, because tonight's story will leave you breathless. Blood pounded against Julian's eardrums louder than the torrential rain smashing into the asphalt, the metallic taste of fear coating his tongue as he shoved his 5-year-old son, Leo, into the narrow gap behind the overflowing dumpster. "Stay down," Julian hissed, his voice fracturing, his hands trembling as he shielded the boy's small body with his own soaked coat. The footsteps were heavy, deliberate, and closing in from the mouth of the alleyway, leather boots splashing in puddles mixed with oil and street grime. Julian pressed his back against the cold brick, clutching a jagged piece of rusted pipe he'd scavenged from the debris. It was a pathetic defense against the men hunting them, men who carried silenced pistols and orders from the city's most ruthless syndicate. But Julian was a father first and a coward second. A shadow elongated across the wet pavement, a silhouette framed by the flickering neon of a dying street lamp. "Found you, little accountant," a voice sneered, dripping with sadistic amusement. Julian squeezed his eyes shut, bracing for the bullet, when the roar of an engine shattered the night. It wasn't just a car, it was a guttural, mechanical scream that vibrated in Julian's chest. A motorcycle, massive and black as a void, tore into the alleyway, drifting sideways with impossible precision. The tires kicked up a wall of dirty water, blinding the gunman. Before the assassin could realign his aim, the rider was off the bike, a blur of violence and kinetic energy. A helmet crashed into the gunman's face with the force of a sledgehammer, followed by a sickening crunch of bone. Silence returned, heavy and suffocating, broken only by the idling engine of the fallen bike. Julian dared to open his eyes. The gunman was unconscious, crumpled in the mud. Standing over him was a giant of a man, rain-slicking back jet-black hair that had been revealed when he discarded his helmet. He wore a leather vest that exposed arms thick with muscle and completely covered in intricate, chaotic blackwork tattoos. The stranger turned, his eyes piercing through the gloom, eyes the color of molten amber. He looked at the pipe in Julian's hand, then at the trembling child behind him. "You look like hell," the stranger rumbled, his voice deep enough to rattle Julian's ribs. "Get on the bike. Unless you want to wait for his friends to wake up." The ride was a blur of wind and terrifying speed. Julian clung to the stranger's waist, feeling the hard, unyielding wall of muscle beneath the leather. Leo was sandwiched between them, secured by the stranger's massive belt which he had unlooped and strapped around the boy with surprising gentleness before they took off. They arrived at a sprawling, converted warehouse on the outskirts of the industrial district. The neon sign above the rolling metal door buzzed with the words "Iron and Ink Customs." Inside, the air smelled of motor oil, stale coffee, and sandalwood. It was warm, a stark contrast to the biting cold of the storm outside. The stranger parked the bike and killed the engine. He dismounted, his movements fluid and predatory, like a panther prowling its territory. "Towels are in the back. Bathrooms to the left," the man said, not looking at them as he walked toward a workbench covered in scattered tools and engine parts. "Don't touch anything sharp." Julian's legs felt like jelly as he helped Leo down. The boy was wide-eyed, mute as he had been since the night his mother died, the night the troubles began. Julian ushered his son into the bathroom, washing the grime from the boy's face with shaking hands. He caught his own reflection in the cracked mirror, pale, hollow-cheeked, with dark circles bruising the skin under his eyes. He looked like a ghost haunting the living. When they emerged, the stranger was sitting on a stool, wiping grease from a wrench with a rag. He had shed his vest, revealing a white tank top that clung to a torso sculpted from granite. The tattoos didn't stop at his arms. They crept up his neck, serpentine patterns that seemed to move when he breathed. I don't have money," Julian started, his voice thin. "I can't pay you." The man looked up. Up close, he was devastatingly handsome in a rough, dangerous way. A scar bisected his left eyebrow, adding an edge to his intense gaze. "Did I ask for money?" "No, but—" "Name's Kalen," the man interrupted, tossing the rag onto the bench. He stood up, towering over Julian. "And you're Julian Vance, the forensic accountant who disappeared with the Viper Syndicate's ledger 3 days ago." Julian froze, his blood running cold. He stepped back, instinctively putting himself between Kalen and Leo. How do you know that? Kalen huffed, a sound that was almost a laugh. News travels fast in the gutter, Julian. There's a bounty on your head big enough to buy this whole city block. Are you going to turn me in? Julian asked, gripping the edge of a tool cabinet, his knuckles white. Kalen's eyes drifted to Leo, who was staring at the motorcycle with fascination. The big man's expression softened, a microscopic shift that Julian almost missed. I don't deal with the vipers. And I don't sell out fathers running with their kids. You stay here tonight. Tomorrow, we figure out how to get you out of the city. Why? Julian whispered. Why help us? Kalen walked past him, his shoulder brushing Julian's, sending a jolt of electricity through Julian's nervous system. Because I know what it's like to be hunted for something you didn't do. And because I like the quiet ones. The one night turned into 3. The storm outside refused to break, flooding the roads and locking the city down, making travel impossible. In that time, the warehouse became a strange, liminal sanctuary. Julian found himself watching Kalen constantly. He watched the way Kalen's back muscles rippled when he lifted heavy engine blocks. He watched the surprising delicacy of Kalen's large, calloused fingers when he showed Leo how to fix a toy car. Leo, who hadn't smiled in months, was shadowing the biker like a duckling. It was the 3rd night when the atmosphere shifted. Leo was asleep on a makeshift cot in the office. Julian was sitting on the leather sofa in the lounge area, nursing a cup of cheap whiskey Kalen had poured him. Kalen was working on a bike, the sparks from his welder illuminating his focused face in erratic bursts of orange light. Kalen turned off the torch and lifted his welding mask. Sweat glistened on his chest. He walked over, grabbing the bottle and taking a swig straight from the neck. You stopped shaking yet? Kalen asked, sitting next to Julian. The cushion dipped under his weight, pulling Julian slightly closer. Mostly, Julian murmured. Until I remember they're still out there. They aren't getting in here, Kalen said, his voice dropping an octave. It sounded like a vow. You're just a mechanic, Kalen, Julian said, though the words lacked conviction. The vipers. They have an army. If they find us, you can't stop them with a wrench. Kalen turned his head, locking eyes with Julian. The intensity was suffocating. I'm a lot of things, Julian. Mechanic is just the one that pays the rent. He leaned in. The smell of him, musk, rain, and hot metal, filled Julian's senses. Julian's breath hitched. He should have pulled away. He should have maintained the walls he had built around his heart since his wife's murder. But Kalen was a gravitational force. You're staring, Kalen murmured, his gaze dropping to Julian's lips. I'm trying to figure you out, Julian admitted, his voice barely audible. You look like a villain, but you act like a what? A hero. Kalen let out a dry, bitter chuckle. I'm no hero, sweetheart. Heroes don't have the things I have on my conscience. He reached out, his rough thumb tracing the line of Julian's jaw. The touch was electric. Julian leaned into it, starving for contact, for safety. When Kalen kissed him, it wasn't tentative. It was possessive, demanding, and hot enough to burn. Julian melted against him, his hands tangling in Kalen's damp hair, the taste of whiskey and danger overwhelming him. For a moment, the vipers, the ledger, the danger, it all ceased to exist. There was only the heat of Kalen's skin and the strength of his arms wrapping around Julian, pulling him into his lap. The bubble burst the next morning. Julian woke to the sound of shattering glass. He bolted upright on the sofa, clutching the blanket. The massive rolling door of the warehouse had been blown off its hinges. Sunlight streamed in, choked by dust and debris. Through the haze, men poured in. Dozens of them. They wore the distinct charcoal suits of the Viper Syndicate. Kalen, Julian screamed, scrambling toward the office where Leo was sleeping. Kalen emerged from the back room, not running, but walking with a terrifyingly calm gait. He held a heavy wrench in one hand, but the sheer number of guns pointed at him made the weapon look laughable. A man in a white suit stepped through the wreckage of the door. It was Silas, the Viper's enforcer. He smiled, a reptilian baring of teeth. Mr. Vance, Silas drawled. And the whelp. You've led us on quite the chase. And you? He turned his gaze to Kalen, the mechanic who decided to play night. Cute. Two men grabbed Julian, forcing him to his knees. Another dragged a crying Leo from the office. Let them go, Kalen said. His voice was devoid of emotion, flat, and cold. Or what? Silas laughed. You'll fix my carburetor? Kill him. Silas gestured to a gunman standing behind Kalen. Wait, Kalen said. It wasn't a plea. It was a command. Kalen dropped the wrench. It clanged loudly on the concrete. Slowly, deliberately, he reached for the hem of his white tank top. Last requests. Silas mocked. Kalen pulled the shirt over his head and tossed it aside. For a second, the room was silent. Then, a ripple of unease spread through the Viper thugs. Julian stared. He had seen Kalen's arms, but he hadn't seen his back. Now, exposed in the harsh morning light, the masterpiece was visible. Covering his entire back, from shoulders to waist, was a tattoo of a snarling, nine-headed hydra, inked in black and gold. It was a specific, legendary design. Silas's face went the color of ash. The gun in his hand wavered. The hydra, Silas whispered, his voice trembling. That crest belongs to the Obsidian Lord, the Obsidian clan, the only organization the Vipers feared. They were an ancient, brutal syndicate from the north that had dismantled entire governments. Their leader, the Iron Sovereign, had vanished 5 years ago. Rumors said he had died. Rumors said he had grown bored of war. Kalen rolled his neck, a sickening crack echoing in the silent warehouse. His stance shifted. The mechanic was gone. In his place stood a warlord. I retired, Kalen said, his voice echoing with an authority that made the windows rattle. I wanted a quiet life. I wanted to fix bikes and drink cheap beer. He took a step forward. The gunman instinctively stepped back. But you, Kalen continued, his eyes glowing with a dark, murderous light. You brought the war to my doorstep. You touched my guest. You woke the dragon. Kill him. Silas shrieked, panic seizing him. He's just one man. I am the sovereign, Kalen roared. The violence that followed was not a fight. It was an execution. Kalen moved faster than humanly possible. He didn't need a gun. He used the environment. A chain hanging from the ceiling, a loose pipe, his bare fists. He moved through the gunfire like smoke, brutal and efficient. Julian shielded Leo's eyes, pressing the boy's face into his chest, but he couldn't look away. He watched the man he had kissed, the man who had fixed Leo's toy car, dismantle 20 armed hitmen with the precision of a surgeon. It was terrifying. It was awe-inspiring. Within 2 minutes, silence returned. Bodies littered the floor. Only Silas remained standing, his gun clicking empty on a dry chamber. Kalen stood before him, blood splattered across his chest and the golden hydra on his back. He didn't look winded. He looked bored. Who sent you? Kalen asked softly. The Dawn, Silas stammered, falling to his knees. Please, Lord Kalen. I didn't know. Now you do. Kalen didn't raise a hand. He simply pointed to the door. Go. Tell your Dawn that Julian Vance is under the protection of the Obsidian clan. Tell him if he sends another man, I will burn his empire to the ground and salt the earth. Silas scrambled backward, tripping over his own feet, and ran into the sunlight, disappearing as fast as his legs could carry him. Kalen stood amidst the carnage for a long moment, his chest heaving slightly. He didn't turn around immediately. He seemed to be waiting for Julian to run, to scream, to reject the monster he had just revealed himself to be. Julian stood up, his legs shaky. He picked up a rag from the nearest bench. He walked over to Kalen. The biker flinched as Julian approached, his muscles tense. Julian, Kalen warned, his voice rough. Don't. You saw what I am. You should take the boy and run. You're right, Julian said, stepping into the blood-slicked circle. I saw. He reached out and began to wipe the blood from Kalen's chest. Kalen froze, looking down at the smaller man with wide, disbelief-filled eyes. You're the Obsidian Lord, Julian said, scrubbing at a particularly dark stain over Kalen's heart. A killer. A criminal kingpin. Yes, Kalen rasped. But, Julian continued, dropping the rag and placing his palm flat against Kalen's beating heart. You're also the man who gave up his bed for my son. You're the man who stood in front of a firing squad for a stranger. Julian looked up, meeting those amber eyes. I'm tired of running, Kalen. I've been running my whole life. The monsters are out there. He gestured to the door. But inside here? I think I'm safe. Kalen let out a shuddering breath, his walls crumbling. He wrapped his bloodied arms around Julian, careful not to stain Julian's shirt, burying his face in Julian's neck. I will protect you, Kalen swore, his voice muffled against Julian's skin. As long as I breathe, no one touches you or the boy again. The mechanic is dead. The sovereign is back. For you. Julian closed his eyes, holding the dangerous man tight. He knew life would never be simple again. He was now the consort of the most dangerous man in the underworld. But as he felt the steady, powerful thrum of Kalen's heart, Julian Vance finally stopped shaking. And that is how the viper tamed the wolf. If you enjoyed seeing the sovereign reclaim his throne for love, destroy that like button. And tell me in the comments, would you stay with a man who had a secret past as a criminal warlord? I'll be reading your answers. Subscribe for the next chapter. Until then, prompt image. Prompt, masterpiece, best quality, high-res, 1.2. Korean manhwa style, semi-realistic, digital art, 2 min, BL, yaoi, man 1. Tall, muscular build, long wet black hair, shirtless, intricate Yakuza-style Hydra tattoo on back and shoulders, sweat glistening. Intense protective expression, wearing low-slung mechanic pants, covered in grease and blood splatters. Man 2, shorter, slim build, brown hair, wearing oversized borrowed shirt, hugging Man 1 from behind, face pressed against Man 1's back, expression of relief and love. Background is gritty mechanic garage, scattered tools, broken glass, dramatic shaft of sunlight cutting through dust, motorcycle in background, cinematic lighting, emotional atmosphere, sharp focus.